The 80s of Shonen Jump was filled with countless classics and manga that would define the medium for generations to come. But among its peers stands a forgotten classic, one that holds all the hallmarks of its brethren, and in a time of great competition, it managed to hold its own for a considerable amount of time. This is the legend of that manga and of its author, who fought tooth and claw to be amongst the greats of Shonen Jump's golden age. Full name: Godsider. Start date: May 11th, 1987. End date: November 14th, 1988. Total chapters: 78. Kouji Maki has a long and storied history, beginning as an elementary schooler where it was his dream to make manga for a living. He would submit his first work for Shonen Jump's Newcomer Award in 1974 at the age of 16, and then would continue to submit one-shots to various magazines including both Jump, Sunday, and CoroCoro throughout his university years. He would debut in none of these magazines, however, getting a series called Hurricane Jiro in Shonen King in 1981, and then a second series called Rolling King a year later. However, tragedy would strike as the magazine itself would be closed down, resulting in his series ending with it. Maki would then return to Jump, being interested in some of its new lineup with Black Angels by Shinji Hiromatsu and Gekigoku Toreika by Akira Miyashita. Realizing that a more seinen, as he puts it, series could belong in the magazine, he tried his damnedest to fit in. Immediately though, he was struck by editors wanting him to make a cross-dressing or trans series, since Stop Hibari-kun was insanely popular at the time. But when he couldn't come up with anything, a mecha series was proposed as an idea, which spawned Samurai R. A one-shot would be published in Fresh Jump, with Maki getting the green light for it to become a full serialization later. But before then, he was urged to help out a brand new rookie within the magazine, to do a favor to get a favor. And this rookie would be Tetsuo Hara, on a little-known series called Fist of the North Star. With some more experience under his belt and a promise fulfilled, he went on to create his own series, but was met with a compromise. He wouldn't exactly be the full-on writer, as they'd lump him with the writer who won a competition, and thus Samurai R died so Mecha Battler Gilfer could be born. Only to die very quickly, with Maki releasing a few one-shots after this in Fresh Jump, such as Buster 3 and Black Star. His efforts weren't amounting to much though, so next his editor at the time suggested he try something very risky. Subvert literally everything, attempt to shake the very foundation of shonen manga, and this birthed his next series, Metal K. A dark fantasy series following a female cyborg girl who takes revenge on all those who've wronged her and her family, full of action and horror film inspiration. It would also be cut very short. A glimmer of hope remained though, as after this, Kouji Maki was given the option to be serialized again instantly. All he had to do was make a new storyboard, and this is what would become Godsider. Beginning with a quote from the Book of Revelations, Godsider instantly sets itself up as a biblical epic where the forces of good and evil wage an eternal battle over the fate of humankind. The battle between the Devil-siders and the God-siders. A core player here is our protagonist, Riki Kiko, the son of Satan but imbued with the power of the God-siders, who could be the key to ending this eternal war for good. For this video, I won't be digging too deep into the story, as it's not God-siders' greatest asset, and a lot of it boils down to fights between Riki and the various hellspawn he faces, though I will run through some of its more exciting events and content. First off, its cast is relatively simple and comprised of other Godsiders who help Riki out throughout his journey to defeat evil, such as the stoic if a bit bland Atara, the American military man and former New York Salty Dogs quarterback Crash Mulligan, and the generic cool guy with a mohawk Hoshoku, who wields the powers of the Philosopher's Stone. Throughout the story, they go through arc after arc of beating down various demons like Beelzebub the Fly Master, who houses themselves in a labyrinthine dungeon beneath the Grand Canyon. And to give you a sense of what exactly the cast deal with on a regular basis, Beelzebub has sent their minions across the world to establish various satanic circles to create a portal to literally summon Satan onto the earth. The story is pretty formulaic, with events like this occurring, a new big bad being established, their generals being fought, and numerous shonen battle manga tropes being peppered in for good measure. Most arcs will either contain an enemy character switching to the good guy's side as a new Godsider, usually a female character by the way, or a new Godsider randomly appearing to save the day, or a Godsider dying only to come back suddenly from hell. The concept of death is played very fast and loose here. We also have the fights, which are basically this meme.
Negates the xylophone. You really can just toss that away at this point. Yeah. Pulls out a CD. Oh, if he has a pen, he was holding the pen the whole time. He can just sign it.
But they also have absolutely metal sounding attack names for everything, like Hellish Heavenly Blood Eruption Barrage, all with my personal favourite being Crash Mulligan's Jesus Flash. Describing it out loud, I feel like all of this would get old pretty fast, but it manages to remain entertaining throughout due to various factors, like Kouji gorgeous artwork, which makes for some great spectacle. He can draw some really fun evil creatures, though my personal favourite aspects are some of his more psychological attacks launched at our heroes, where he gets very creative and weird with his art. Perhaps my favourite psychological element or part is the Demon's Art Gallery section, where there's tons of different set pieces filled with weird psychedelic things the heroes have to go through. The villains are also core to why Godsider is so entertaining. They're dastardly, perfectly evil, and over the top, and stand out even more due to how bland the main cast usually is. Sorry guys. Some villains include a group of devil Nazis that shout "Seek Satan," this evil Spock-looking bastard called the Earl of Lacenaire, a bunch of evil furries, and Pazuzu, who starts off as a literal baby that the cast have to fight. Going back to the plot somewhat, later on it turns out that there are actually 2 sets of magical circles at each site, which Beelzebub set up earlier. One above ground, which the Godsiders erased, and one below. So while the Godsiders did erase one set of circles, there was another, and I find this development hilarious as it allows Satan to come back, and it's such a bullshit twist that neither the readers nor the characters could anticipate. It's very on brand for Godsider though, and I think it's the type of series where you have to roll with what it throws at you, and if you do, it's a lot of fun. Let's face it as well, you're not here for coherent, grand storytelling, you're here for its other elements that it excels in, like its occult imagery, over-the-top attack names, and bucket loads of gore and spectacle. So, Satan's back. And before the Godsiders get to him, he and Pazuzu have a massive kaiju-esque fight. The Godsiders manage to take action though, defeating Pazuzu with a group attack, allowing them to get rid of one evil for good, at the cost of letting Satan fly off and for all of their lives. Not really a great trade, and I would also probably go for Satan rather than Pazuzu since he seems like the bigger bad, but oh well. With the Godsiders dead, Satan's influence permeates the world, and the United States ICBMs bomb the Earth, causing an apocalypse, and for the last 5 years, demons have ruled. There's little resistance, but gradually people have been standing up, including the son of Crash, Tommy Mulligan, capable of using the Jesus Flash as well. We see him find one of the 5 atomic blades capable of defeating Satan, with this final arc then seeing countless battles rage on as the Godsiders try to attain these blades, fight enemies old and new, and we see the devastation done to the United States with it being filled with devils like some kind of SMT game. I especially love the scene with the demonic helicopter, as well as the Statue of Liberty housing what seems to be a giant devil. It's just a really fun and great example of one of Maki's strengths in one-upping every single thing he does. Another instance of this is Satan, who sits on a throne of nukes in the Golgotha Valley with his 2 sons Astaroth and Sargatanas. It's just both extremely American and just also extremely over the top, so both of these things fit really well together. Also, I forgot to say that the Godsiders just came back. I think they just all clawed their way out of hell again, which has happened before this, so whatever, it's pre-established, I guess. It's just something, again, you have to accept if you want to enjoy this series, and it also makes for a fun twist, I guess, when they do eventually return. The ending of Godsiders is then a rush of endless twists and turns as enemies are revealed to be Godsiders, Satan's son attempts to betray him, the Archangel Michael gets involved, Ricky gets revived in a new demon god form, getting a new attack called Rainbow God Emperor, and most importantly, the Devil and Godsiders both actually have a common enemy who is more dangerous than either side, the higher dimensional demon god, which takes the form of space itself and has been the mastermind behind everything. And in pure balls to the walls Godsider fashion, in order to beat it, all the Godsiders and humanity itself have to come and join as one, colliding with this being to rebirth the entire world. We're then left with a message that states as long as the power of love exists, the world will never be broken, with a Mount Rushmore-esque monument of the Godsiders looming over humanity's new generation. I can't think of a more fitting end to this insane manga. Godsider isn't the usual cancelled manga I'd cover here on the channel. For starters, it's from the 80s and is largely overlooked, but its main differentiating factor is its length, as 78 chapters is pretty long for a cancelled series. Usually I would ask then, was Godsider cancelled at all? But we have the info for that from the source, which I'll dig into later. But to put it simply, during the late 80s, Jump was deep into its golden age, with works like Dragon Ball, City Hunter, Saint Seiya, and Fist of the North Star housed within the magazine, with plenty of other burgeoning hits, which also included a little-known series called JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. JoJo and Godsider have similar DNA, both a horror series featuring over-the-top action, they were weird, and also had a big focus on gore, and were multicultural, with both stories taking place all around the world, including having a segment in America. With Jump at the time being so stacked, they only had room for one such series like this, so they pitted them against each other to see which one would come out on top. Godsider is JoJo's forgotten rival, and we all know how this story ends, as JoJo is still ongoing years later and remains one of Shonen Jump's most beloved series. At a different time, or maybe with a different editorial environment, perhaps both series could have survived. I could go into a little debate on why JoJo overtook Godsider, but I don't really want to compare these two manga, as they both excel in different areas and I'm heavily biased in JoJo's favour. I think it's simpler to just consider the circumstances at the time and know that JoJo performed better in sales and likely in surveys too. Due to its length, I have less responses from the community than usual, but pretty much all of them are little essays, so let's dig into what some others have to say about Godsider. I'm pretty curious too, as for some it's likely a rarer glimpse into a manga from a time period they're unfamiliar with. First off, we have Kinky, who praises the art, finding the action scenes to be great, as well as the armor, though now and again some scenes would be a bit overwhelming with so much going on, and at times characters could be hard to tell apart. This was a criticism that a few others lobbied as well, and I completely agree with. The generic Godsider armor sometimes makes characters hard to tell apart, and I don't think Kouji Maki has the best facial variety, as I often confuse characters like Atara and Reiki sometimes as well. Another major criticism which we'll see a lot of is the characters aren't great. That's not to say they're horrible, but they're quite thin and don't do much aside from act as a vehicle to push the story forward, with the exception being some of the villains who have enough charisma to make fights and arcs interesting. That can't quite be said about the final villain for Kinky though, as they found their introduction too sudden and they weren't built up enough before the conclusion due to the twist in the narrative, making them come across as quite weak. Another thing Kinky mentioned was that they could easily see this being a seinen manga, which isn't something I'd usually address when talking about series, as the demographic debate surrounding manga is pretty tiresome. However, Kouji Maki himself is incredibly invested in the ideas of what a shonen or seinen manga could be, and throughout his time in Jump he tried to push the boundaries of what he could serialize, which has evidently come across, with Kinky describing it akin to Berserk or even the works of Go Nagai, which others mentioned too. I am aware that Devilman is a shonen manga, by the way, and a lot of Go Nagai's works were. I'm mainly bringing it up because Kinky brought it up and for comparison's sake, as it's also a work that pushed boundaries within a shonen magazine. It could be really fun to actually talk about that topic in a future video. talking about Devilman, Go Nagai's influence, Godsider again, and Chainsaw Man. I think talking about manga like that as a topic could be really fascinating. At the very least, I think mentioning Godsider being seinen-ish in feel would make Kouji happy, as that's definitely something he was aiming for during the serialization. Byland seem to really enjoy their time reading Godsider, which is evident with how they describe it as some of the craziest shit I've ever read. Excellent summation of Godsider as a whole. They also bring up the lack of an anime and how fitting an OVA of Godsider would be, and I completely agree. Godsider has the perfect material and vibe for a late 80s or early 90s dark fantasy OVA, and it's a massive shame it never got one, as I think it would have really helped put it on the map. I also really enjoyed Byland's description of Godsider being very metal, and their enthusiasm of having read and enjoyed an older manga. Zenomat says that Godsider whips ass on a pure spectacle level, and I really like their comment that the commitment to an epic battle between the forces of gods and devils was well sustained. I agree with that sentiment. Even if Godsider suffered in certain areas, it manages to be fun in how it portrays this grand narrative and battle between the forces of good and evil. Kouji was definitely constantly outdoing himself and tried his best till the very end. Zenomat also praised the art like everyone else, but commented especially on the differences between the intricate ornamental Godsider armor and the disgusting appearances of the demons. The contrast there is a great thing to highlight, and it adds to why the artwork is so good. The setting and scenery sees some praise here too, which is an element I adored as well. Kouji goes to great lengths to make sure where everyone is fighting is fun, with Zenomat bringing up areas like the Devil's Art Gallery and Hospital as highlights. I also want to bring up America overall here too, as in its post-apocalypse wasteland form it's super cool and provides for a great setting for the latter half of the manga. While I didn't provide much of a comparison between JoJo vs Godsider, I appreciate Zenomat chiming in as they saw why the two were being compared and brought up JoJo as having a stronger focus on character drama, letting you be more invested in its fights, and then said fights also have a strategic and more intricate edge to them, explaining why it likely survived over Godsider. And I 100% agree here. I think that's one reason why it ended up staying. Joni didn't really enjoy it, especially as much as everyone else so far, and couldn't get invested due to how thin the characters were. The lack of stakes, especially when characters would die and resurrect, harmed it too, and for these reasons, I think if you didn't fall into its vibe, it would be a pretty boring manga. I don't want to call it a brain-off manga, but like Zenomat said in the prior review, it's definitely a popcorn type series. While there was some criticisms towards the story structure too, with an overabundance of exposition and the feeling of being dragged around, which I do understand, Joni also brought up liking a few scenes, like the ending as well as when everyone gets together to stop a certain attack or curse. I think this is an aspect I wanted more of, which would have made Godsider a better manga. More camaraderie and emotion from its main cast. More love should have been portrayed, as that's the final message of the manga. Aside from these scenes and some pretty bare-bones relationships, I don't think it was tackled enough. There was also the sentiment from Joni that it overstayed its welcome, that while watching Kouji one-up himself was fun for the first 50 chapters, by the final arc it wore off and got boring. Another thing I agree with, and perhaps the looming axe as well as the pressure to do one better each time, backed Kouji into a corner, making the final arc a bit of a mess. There's also criticism lobbied at Godsider's objectionable content here, as there's a lot of sexism, racism, animal death, sexual assault, etc., which partly is due to the time, but perhaps there was too much, and the question of was it excessive is a fair one to ask, and my answer would be perhaps yes. From my perspective, it felt like it was something I signed up for when I began reading, and I wasn't overly shocked by anything, but I can see why people would be, and it certainly pushed Jump's boundaries. This feeds into our next commenter, which Sarah, whose experience was much more negative, and they also criticized the over-sexualization of its female cast, with them frequently being exposed or assaulted in ways to promote eroticism. Another aspect of criticism was how the series tackled religion, as it featured the use of the Star of David as a satanic symbol, and the Hebrew language and misunderstandings of Satanists generally. I don't want to sound like I'm just offering excuses here, but from the perspective of a Japanese mangaka whose main exposure to the world and these ideas is likely through film inspiration, it's not surprising that things like this would be wrong. It's definitely not intentional bigotry, which is the big difference here, I think. Maki's approach seems to be taking bits and pieces from various cultures and religions as if they're a smorgasbord, and I don't see any ill intent with any of it. The comment then of this being something a 15-year-old would make if you told them to copy Berserk is kind of accurate. It is super edgy, there isn't much care put into how it approaches some of its aspects, but I think that's also a positive of it in a weird way. It's so distinctly of its time, it's seeped in Maki's inspirations, it's over the top and hyper-violent and not something that would really fly today. The criticisms here pile up to being a bit redundant, I think. I hope that's not too mean of me. At least I think these are topics that should be tackled in media, perhaps in more thoughtful ways now, but there's no real use bringing a modern lens to something that came out in 1987, at least in this form. I think the context of what Godsider is, who made it, who it's for is important here. I totally get not vibing with it though, or liking its content, but media can exist that showcases problematic elements so long as it's obviously not encouraging them, and we're dealing with something almost 40 years divorced from us as well. Fullmetal's review surprised me as it was pretty heartfelt and different to the rest, and this is because they previously read Kouji Maki's biography, which allowed them to connect with the world on a deeper level. You might be wondering, throughout this video I've been showing various manga panels and pages from a manga that's not Godsider but is very relevant to what I'm talking about. This is because Kouji Maki himself has an autobiographical manga depicting his journey throughout Shonen Jump called Series Axed. This would be created much later in his career, in 2016, but it showcases his entire journey throughout Weekly Shonen Jump, and this is what Fullmetal is alluding to. It helps ground Godsider as an actual work made by a real person, and gives you great context to what else was going on in Kouji Maki's life at the time, as well as the pressures put on him. I'd wager if you're interested in this sort of thing, it'd be impossible to not feel for Maki like Fullmetal mentions. It colours Godsider a bit differently too, and makes it a lot more sentimental. Apart from this, Fullmetal praises Godsider's great horror imagery and designs, leading them to experience a strong sense of immersion when they read, and they felt very glad we got to cover it as an X-File, in due part because of how interesting it is from a historical standpoint. Despite having a lot less comments to pull from this time, I feel like we got a wide array of feelings and perspectives to cover, and I'm happy we had people who enjoyed it and didn't. It's also interesting to see people approach older media like this, and it's a big reason I started my History of Jump series. Not everyone is going to vibe with certain topics or art styles, but now and again people will appreciate it, and there's something so satisfying at seeing something a human made decades ago that's still resonant in some way. There's value in all art inherently for what it is, but also from the time we're divorced from it, which I think is shown well here in the feelings people have surrounding Godsider. I also really like that people are willing to give older manga a go. The Shonen Jump and manga sphere online is so focused on what's new all the time, and rarely do I hear people discuss or analysing older works, at least pound for pound. So when something is relatively forgotten about, like Godsider, sharing it like this feels special. More eyes get on it, people can remember it or appreciate it as part of manga's canon. And as a human and an artist, it's a warm feeling to know that someone's work won't be forgotten as long as we pass it down. Kouji Maki would continue to make manga after Godsider would be cancelled, and what would immediately come out post its release was another manga series called The Green Eyes in 1989, which would sadly only last 17 chapters before being cancelled. At this point, Maki was fed up with shonen manga. Jump had constrained him, he wasn't drawing what he wanted to draw, he couldn't break free from his contract with Shonen Jump, and when he did get a success, he was pitted against a fearsome rival and met many editor changes. Kouji Maki, frustrated, vowed to never make shonen manga again. His contract with Jump would expire in 1989, and he began McQuitzel, the Death Reaper of the Sun, the next year in Super Jump, with it running for 13 volumes. Maki's work after this would up the levels of sex and violence, with him running The Splendid Days of Queen Ruriko for 5 volumes about the owner of a bondage club. Then Tasokare's Dream lasting 3 volumes, Hellbuster Hunter of the Hell Sex lasting 2, and Black Labyrinth Troop lasting 4, switching from Super Jump to Manga Allman and then to Oh Super Jump. To avoid this becoming a full-on list, Kouji Maki made a ton of manga throughout the 90s and early 2000s, featuring all sorts of stories and genres, but they all remained his own, dark with a lot of bite to them, just like Godsider. Most notably though, after all of this, he'd returned to Godsider, creating Godsider 2nd in Weekly Comic Bunch from 2004 to 2008. As a side note, Comic Bunch was kind of formed by a lot of older Jump veterans, like the creators of Fist of the North Star and City Hunter, with them featuring new series from those authors, so Maki being involved kind of feels right. He is a part of that grouping of authors, he just is a bit forgotten about in the West, and Godsider never achieved the wider appeal that these series did. Godsider 2nd would last 12 volumes and would continue the story. Other series of his would also get similar treatment too, with Metal K receiving Revenger Metal K2 lasting 5 volumes, being a sort of sequel to Metal K. McQuitzel 2, The Reaper of the Sun would also be released as a sequel, seeing it get 4 volumes, and Godsider would get a spin-off after this, with Godsider Saga Shinma Sangokushi lasting 5 volumes. It's kind of wonderful to see an author who struggled so much within Shonen Jump and who sounded so dejected draw so much manga and revisit beloved series years later with new material. Series X would come out after this, and this only aids the narrative of Kouji Maki as an author who fought to make the manga he wanted to. I highly recommend checking out Series X, by the way, as it has a full translation, is short, and is an excellent narrative delving into a real person's account of their time in Shonen Jump, and specifically it touches on axed manga and the processes of being axed. It gives us a first-hand account of how it works and feels, and as well as this, it's packed with info and funny anecdotes about Jump's golden age, which I think fans of my videos would love. It's also something I'd like to talk about more, as my thoughts on Kouji Maki as an author and this particular autobiography are pretty lengthy. There's a lot to touch on, like Maki's desire to make seinen manga, and the whole demographic debate of what a shonen manga should be. The desire to create for an author to make what they want without being constrained, the corporate aspects of Shonen Jump, and how editors fit into everything. I don't think I've seen anyone bear their creative soul quite like Kouji Maki. I find it really commendable, and his story deserves to be spread. This is meant to be a video on Godsider though, so I'll reserve a lot of my thoughts for a potential future video. Please let me know if that's something you'd like to listen to. What I will leave you with though is that Kouji Maki is still making manga, like Shodo and Fake World in the 2020s. Currently in 2025 he's still illustrating. There was an exhibition of his held in April of this year, and recently a crowdfunding event was launched for his next manga, Metal K Legend Revival Edition, which has met its 3 million yen quota. Kouji Maki is alive, he's still making manga when so many other Jump authors have stopped or even passed away. Every single one of his Jump manga getting cancelled never stopped him, and I think there's something very inspiring about that. While Godsider may have been cancelled, it did well to hold its own against the titans of the Golden Age, and to even be considered a rival of one of the biggest manga period, I think that's a massive accomplishment. For this reason, I think Godsider should be considered one of the kings of axe manga, and something that shouldn't ever be forgotten. If you enjoyed this video, please stick around for more. I have a ton of Axfile videos like this, mostly on newer cancelled manga, but for something related and around a similar time, I have one on Araki's cancelled manga Bao the Visitor. I've also talked about Godsider before in my History of Shonen Jump video series, where I explore every manga that was serialized within the magazine year by year. If you like the historical aspects of this video, chances are you'll like them as well. Also, if you really like what I make here and would be willing to support me, you can through my Patreon for as little as $1 a month. You'll get access to some exclusive videos and polls to decide what manga I cover next on the Axe Files, which is how this video exists, by the way. Thank you patrons for voting Godsider in. And you also get your name in the credits of every video. As well as this, at the $3 tier or higher, you'll also get a unique little doodle drawn by me to represent you in the credits, like the following cool people: Kinocha, Jade, Kaizukugaru, Sorrowful Zero, Holly the Apothecary, Mayu, It's Faco, Yellowtail, Lay Sloggett, Chris P. Bacon, Joe Henshin, Full Metal, Unquestionable, Yozakura Psycho, Wurzel, Violent, Cactus, Joni, City Name E, Vina Burrito, Caffeine Dad, Cryonaut, Crash, 41IZ, Hong, Jamie Reynolds, Manu, Poke Emblem, and also Hilltop, Vaco Draws, Otaku Gamer X, Deadpan, Shy Monkeys, Jonathan Dragonet, John Sanford, Color, Jaime, Strawberry Proshone, and Vaz at the $1 tier. Thank you all so much for being patrons, and as always, thank you so much for watching. Remember to be kind and take care. A little side note as the video ends, I talked to my dad about Godsider once, and he thought it was a manga about, like, the god of cider, like a cider making manga, and I found that really funny. I thought I would just mention it as a little video end note, because I think it's kind of goofy.